Hello everyone, it's Jenny Fogarty here. I'm the Director of Initial Teacher Training at ARU. As you know, delivering feedback is arguably the key aspect of the mentor's role. It's how we all make progress in whatever role we hold. If we can't give or take feedback, we'll never learn anything. Today we're going to be thinking about how we give structured and meaningful feedback to trainees to support their progress. So let's start by thinking about how we define feedback. In much of the literature you'll be reading around mentoring, they'll be using the word feedback often, but it's not clear always what we mean by it. If we take what the DfE defines as feedback as a starting point, we can begin to unpack it. They talk about receiving clear and consistent feedback from expert colleagues, that's you, on a particular approach, using the best available evidence to provide a structured process for improving the trainee's practice. So we're going to unpack today what we mean by being clear and consistent and what a structured process is going to look like. And we've taken this from the core content framework produced by the DfE in 2019. As an experienced teacher and practitioner, you'll have had many instances in the past where you've been required to give or take feedback. When we talk about feedback, we're looking for high quality, meaningful dialogue. That's verbal feedback, but also written feedback. We can create a dialogue through both means. We know that it's integral to formative assessment. It's part of that ongoing process that we have of refining and understanding our trainees' needs and creating that climate and culture of formative assessment where we're always striving to improve. Feedback is an intentional process, so it needs protected, intentional time to do it well. It's not on the hoof as you're going from one fast-paced activity to the next, in the corridor or on the playground. It has its own time and that is protected, and it's clear to the trainee when they are receiving feedback. It may also include written notes, and that's really important. But today we're going to be thinking about how you focus on the conversation, the dialogue, the words that we're using. Feedback needs to respond to the trainees about a focused aspect of the training curriculum. When we say to them, we're giving you feedback, they need to know that it's going to be clear and focused and not 15 different things that have happened in the last day. And we're always paying attention to our intention. What's the goal here? Well, the goal is for trainees to modify their practice as a result and for things to be better. It's really important that we can always be clear that there's a positive purpose for giving feedback. Let's consider now some of the literature around the principles of effective feedback for you as a mentor. This idea of it being highly structured, so you've got a clear approach and you use it consistently. You're not doing it one way one week and another way another week. We're going to think about that structure later on, but applying that structure consistently is the key. How is the time valued? Again, we're back to paying attention to our intention. How are we demonstrating that our time is valued and our time with our trainee is valued? Are we in a private space? Are we thinking about the trainee's well-being? Are they ready to receive that feedback? Have you put your phone away? It should build and reinforce our relational approach. Who is the trainee in front of you? What do they need? This isn't a one-size-fits-all. You're tailoring your approach to feedback based on your trainee and what you know about them, their starting points and their goals. Remember, it's more than just a conversation. We're role modelling feedback, both giving and receiving, because our trainees will be giving feedback as part of their role. Don't forget, we need to listen, and then listen again. Who's doing the most talking in this feedback? Are we reflecting back to our trainees what they've said to us? And are we adjusting our feedback based on their reflections? We want you to make evaluative judgments, but they need to be based on evidence. So you need to depersonalise as much as possible. This isn't about critiques and personal attacks. It's about using the evidence in front of you, what you've observed, what you've overheard, what you've listened to, and making an evaluative judgment based on your years of experience and expertise to reflect that back to trainees so they can take it as useful feedback to improve their practice. Part of the skill of delivering feedback is recognising some of the barriers that exist to receiving feedback. And we've adapted these from the work of Stone and Heen. They talk about 3 areas of barriers. They can be truth triggers, relationship triggers, or identity triggers. I want you to think about what you would do if any of these triggers emerge. If trainees disagree with you, that's a truth trigger. They feel like your judgments are wrong, they don't agree with what you're saying, and they don't feel like you have enough evidence to support it. What you might hear is some of the following. Well, you only saw the first 10 minutes. It was fine after that. You could consider relationship triggers. What that means is they don't have a strong enough relationship with you to take on board your feedback. Your relationship isn't strong enough to hold that uncomfortable space, what we might call the productive discomfort, and trainees just don't want to hear it from you. They might say to you, well, you haven't been in the classroom for ages. This is how it is now. Other triggers look like identity triggers. So as they establish their trainee identity and their teacher identity, they often take some of the feedback as a way of reasserting that they can just never be a teacher. This challenges their sense of identity. So they might say things like, well, I just can't do this. I'm just not cut out to be a teacher. Sometimes we hear these triggers independently, and sometimes it's a combination of all of them or a couple of them. Think back to an experience that you've had with a trainee where the feedback wasn't received well. Can you identify which of these triggers was stopping the trainee from receiving your feedback? So what do we do if these triggers emerge? We stop giving the feedback. We regroup, we replan, and we use another skill in your mentoring toolkit to support the trainee to understand what they need to do to improve. You might need to strengthen your evidence base. You might need to work on your relationship, or you might need to take the trainee out of their comfort zone to talk to them explicitly about what it means to be a teacher and that teacher identity. Okay, so now we're going to think about our structured approach to giving feedback, and we're going to use this 3-phase approach, and I'm going to talk you through each of the different phases. So the first phase is a preparatory phase, as you'd expect, and it starts with a check-in. So you're going to be asking questions like, how are you? Checking in with your trainee that they are actually ready and available to receive this feedback. Asking questions like, is now a good time for us to have this conversation? It's really important that you can make sure that they are ready to hear what it is you've got to share with them. So the next one, we're going to think about clarifying. So you're in the space, you're ready to give the feedback, but you might have some questions before you go on to give some of that feedback. And this is part of you building that evidence base that we talked about previously. So one of the great ways to open up a conversation where you've got a question and you're not sure how to approach it because it could potentially be challenging, it might be that you've seen something that you're not happy with, is asking the question, could you help me understand? Could you help me understand why you made this choice? Could you help me understand why this thing was happening? Because you're trying to check your premises here, because this is what you've based your judgments on. Asking simply, I have a question about, I'm picking one thing, and giving an opportunity for the trainee to answer that question will tell you a lot about where they're at in regards to their lesson. So it could be that it's to do with a specific lesson, it could be that it's to do with a specific activity or part of the role of teacher, and you need some clarity on it. Listening intentionally to what it is they're telling you will help you understand how ready they are to receive your feedback. And then it's really important to celebrate. In this first phase of feedback, starting with a positive will help you build that relationship. It shows that you're noticing the good, it shows you're noticing progress, and it shows that you're recognizing that everybody needs praise and positive reinforcement. Don't forget that phase, don't forget this part of the feedback mechanism, because if we don't start with phase 1, our trainees will not be ready to receive some of our judgments. As we move on to phase 2, you're going to start to think about critique. And as we all know from our academic background, giving a critique is not the same as being critical. It's about being clear and evaluative based on the evidence. So when you did X, it resulted in Y. Were you aware of that? So posing questions as well as giving your feedback is a really good way of engaging in that structured dialogue. When your approach to A resulted in B, again, we're giving an evidence-based judgment here, and it provides an opportunity for trainees to scrutinise that and challenge it if they need to. You then need to think about how you're going to clarify what you've said. So asking the trainees to reflect that back to you. What did you hear from what I've just said? How did that land with you? What alternatives could you use? What do you think of what I've said? Giving them an opportunity to take on board, listen, and reflect it back. And then you're going to construct. So you've critiqued, you've clarified, and now you're going to construct. So that means you're going to be thinking about the next targets, the next things you'd like to see. Next time I'd like to see X. What could you change for a similar session? So building together, constructing the next part of your trainees' learning journey. This is the really meaty section of giving feedback, and it might go on a feedback loop many, many times. So you might go back to that critique, re-clarify and reconstruct. But remember to be thinking about how much information your trainees can take on and how much feedback is actually valuable. And then we're going to think about how we conclude. So asking trainees to reflect back to us, what have you taken away from today? Telling them what you've learned, what it is that you're going to do differently, and how are they feeling about their next steps? How are they feeling about this construction that you've done together? Is that meaningful? Is it possible? And does it feel like they can achieve something positive before you meet again? And then thinking about how we close. Endings are as important as the beginnings, and it's important that we say thank you to trainees for being open to the feedback from us and recognising that we're putting themselves out there, being vulnerable, and acknowledging that through a common courtesy. Thinking about how we're setting up the next meeting. When's a good time for us to meet again? How would you like to take this forward? Giving them some agency in the next steps of their own development. This structure is to help you navigate what can potentially be a tricky conversation. So it's useful as a prompt to think about how you might work through these 3 phases at different times, but remembering that each step is as important as the next. So if you haven't checked in with trainees to ask how they're doing, or you don't listen to what they say when they say, actually, I'm exhausted, I'm not ready for this conversation, then the rest of the feedback that you give is not going to be meaningful. And it refers us back to those triggers that we've talked about before. I'd like you to reflect on this, think about this as an approach, think about how it relates to the literature and how you can implement it with your trainee. So that wraps up our skills development session on feedback. Here's your references and further reading, and I look forward to seeing this in practice.